The first time I saw the feared vampire king fall silent, it wasn't because someone challenged him, or because the moon turned cruel. It was because a poor village teacher lifted her hands and spoke without sound to the deaf twin standing behind him. In the kingdom of Lyr, children learn 2 prayers before they learn to read, one for harvest, and one for protection from the Night Throne. People said the king of Blackglass Keep did not breathe like ordinary men. They said he listened to heartbeats through stone and kept ravens for company. They spoke his name the way they spoke of winter, with respect, dread, and the certainty that it could not be reasoned with. I was a teacher in an outer hamlet, paid more often in bread than coins. My name is Eloan. I taught letters and sums in the old chapel schoolhouse, and I taught something else too, because of Mara. Mara was 8 and deaf, bright-eyed and stubborn, her laughter something you felt in her shoulders rather than heard. The other children used to shout at her as if louder words could reach her. So I learned the village signs from an old midwife, and I shaped new ones when we needed them. We made a quiet language for friend, for again, for don't be afraid. That winter, fear of the king was everywhere. Traders whispered of trouble on the northern roads. A baron's messenger rode through saying the Night Throne was restless. Nobody knew what that meant, and fear filled in the blanks. Then, one morning when snow lay smooth as linen, the king's carriage arrived. It wasn't the gilded kind from songs. It was plain dark wood with iron corners, drawn by 2 steady horses. 3 riders came with it, cloaked and quiet. The reeve ran to greet them with trembling hands. Villagers peered through windows as if glass could stop a legend. I stood in the schoolhouse doorway with a slate and yesterday's bread. Behind me, the children had gone still. Even Mara watched closely, reading panic from the way adults leaned away. The carriage door opened. A man stepped out, pale and composed, younger than the stories yet carrying an age that didn't belong to years. He wore no crown. His stillness itself felt like authority. 2 steps behind him came another man, nearly his twin, but softer in expression, moving with careful attention as if sound had never guided him. The king's gaze settled on my schoolhouse. He approached without haste. Snow crunched under his boots. The reeve tried to speak, "Your Majesty, we," but the king lifted one hand, not harshly, simply to quiet him. The reeve fell silent like someone grateful to stop talking. "I seek a teacher," the king said. His voice wasn't loud. It was steady, practiced, almost gentle. The reeve swallowed. "There's only Mistress Eloan." The king inclined his head. "Then Mistress Eloan will do." I should have asked why, or refused, or demanded safeguards. Instead I heard myself say, "What do you want taught, Your Majesty?" "Language," he answered. A way to speak without sound. The reeve blinked, confused. The king's eyes shifted briefly toward the man behind him. "My brother," he said. "Lucien cannot hear." A murmur moved through the villagers. Pity tried to rise, but fear bent it into something twisted, as if even tenderness had to be suspicious when it belonged near a monster. Lucien stood with his hands folded, used to being overlooked, used to being the quiet weakness people searched for in powerful men. The king looked at me. "You know this language?" I nodded. "Then come," he said. "You will be provided for. Your village will not suffer for your service." The reeve sputtered about the school, but the king answered without even turning to him. The school will remain. The children will have bread enough. The roof will be repaired before spring. It was so specific it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. Before I could reply, Mara stepped forward onto the threshold and lifted her hands. Careful and clear, she signed, "Who are you?" The king's attention dropped to her hands. Something softened around his eyes, so slight I might have missed it if I hadn't spent years watching silent conversations. Lucien leaned forward as if pulled by sunlight. He saw Mara's hands and became instantly awake, hungry to understand. Mara pointed toward him and signed, "You like this?" Lucien's mouth opened, but no sound came. He glanced at his brother, then back to Mara, and lifted his hands clumsily, trying to answer. The king watched, motionless. I stepped down into the snow and knelt beside Mara. "Your Majesty," I asked quietly, "may I speak to him?" For a heartbeat the king's gaze sharpened, power, control, the weight of every story. Then he nodded once. I turned to Lucien and signed slowly, "Hello. I'm Eloan. What's your name?" Lucien's relief was instant and visible, like breath after nearly drowning. He signed back, awkward but eager, "Lucien." Mara beamed and signed quickly, "I'm Mara. I can teach you." Lucien laughed silently and signed, "Please." And that was the moment. The Vampire King, feared by the world, went still as stone, not with anger, but with something he refused to show. He watched his brother and a deaf child share a greeting as if it were a gift laid carefully into open palms. Then, as if he'd stepped into a sacred place, he lowered his gaze. He fell silent in reverence. That evening I rode with them toward Blackglass Keep. The village watched as if I were being carried into a grave. Yet on the road, near a frozen brook, I saw one of the king's riders dismount to help a thin wanderer, ragged, half-frozen, the kind winter would claim. The rider pressed a small pouch into his hands and tightened his cloak. No one announced charity. No one asked for gratitude. In the carriage window, the king watched, expression unreadable, not pleased, not proud, only intent, as if keeping the world from breaking was simply his work. Blackglass Keep rose from the hills like a dark ship on a white sea. But inside it smelled of wood smoke and beeswax, of herbs hung to dry. Lamps burned warm. Servants moved quietly, respectful rather than terrified. My room held a thick blanket and a small desk by a window. The next morning, my lessons began. Lucien arrived first every day, eager as a child who had waited too long for a door to open. The king arrived after, always seated slightly in shadow, as if he preferred not to be seen even in his own home. At first I thought he watched to judge me. But he watched Lucien. When Lucien struggled with a sign, the king's hand would twitch on the chair's arm, as if he wanted to help but didn't know how. When Lucien succeeded, the king's shoulders eased by a fraction. Lucien began to tell stories with his hands, about books, about snowflakes, about loneliness without naming it. He described the way people's mouths moved around him like fish behind glass. One afternoon after Lucien left, I stayed to gather papers. The king remained seated, still as a carved figure. "You love him," I said before I could stop myself. The king's eyes lifted. I braced for coldness. Instead he said, very quietly, "He is my only family." I hesitated. "The world thinks you are a monster." After a long pause he replied, "At times, the world is correct to be cautious." It wasn't cruelty. It was honesty, like a man admitting he had sharp edges and chose, daily, not to cut. "Why bring me here?" I asked. A court scholar could have taught him. "I did," he said, voice tightening. They spoke to him as if he were broken, as if he were a weakness. I will not allow that. Weeks passed. I learned the keep's quiet truths. The king did not hold grand feasts. He met messengers late at night. He was rarely seen, and that absence fed the myths. Yet his kindness left fingerprints everywhere. A servant whispered that wagons of grain had been sent to frost-struck hamlets, unmarked. A stable boy told me the king had paid for the healer's supplies when the apothecary threatened to close. During storms, travelers were admitted and fed in the kitchens, on the steward's orders, never the king's name. "He doesn't want thanks," a servant told me, puzzled. I began to suspect it wasn't humility. It was strategy. If the world accepted him as kind, it might come hunting for whatever made him kind. Then one day I caught the king alone, practicing signs in an empty room. His hands moved carefully, as if each word cost him something. He froze when he saw me. "You're learning," I said. "It is useful," he replied, trying to hide tenderness behind practicality. So I signed, slowly, "You want to speak to him." For a heartbeat his mask slipped, and pain, old and contained, showed through. Then he answered in sign, halting but clear, "Yes." After that, he began signing directly to Lucien, simple things at first. "Good morning. Eat. Rest." Lucien's face each time looked like sunrise. He corrected his brother gently, never mocking, always grateful. The vampire king remained feared by many. Perhaps he always would be. The world likes its monsters simple, because simple stories are easy to carry. But I had seen him fall silent at a child's moving hands. I had seen him give shelter, grain, and protection without a name attached. I had seen him accept misunderstanding as the cost of keeping others safe. And when people asked me what he was truly like, I told them only this. He learned a language so someone he loved would not be alone. Then, if they were willing to listen beyond the old prayers, I added, and that is how you know the truth, kindness can live behind fear, steady and unseen. Chosen again and again the carriage window, the king watched, expression unreadable, not proud, not pleased. Only intent, like kindness was a duty he performed the way others chopped wood or mended nets, because it had to be done. Blackglass keep rose from the hills like a dark ship on a white sea, but inside it was warm with lamplight. It smelled of beeswax and wood smoke and dried herbs, not horror. Servants moved quietly, respectful rather than terrified. My lessons began the next morning. Lucien arrived first every day, hungry for words his hands could shape. The king came after and sat a little apart, half in shadow. At first I thought he watched to judge me. But he watched Lucien. When Lucien struggled, the king's fingers would twitch on the chair's arm as if he wanted to help but didn't know how. When Lucien succeeded, the king's shoulders eased. Weeks passed, and I began to notice what others did not speak of openly. Wagons of grain sent to frost-struck villages. Coin for a healer's supplies delivered in an unmarked box. Travelers admitted during storms and fed in the kitchens, the servants told to say it was the steward's doing. "He doesn't want thanks," one servant whispered, confused. It's as if he wants the kindness to belong to no one. I know. Spring came. The school roof in my village was repaired. Flour appeared at the chapel door in unmarked sacks. Mara taught the other children to sign, and they learned not as a trick, but as a way to make sure no one stood outside the circle again. Even the sign the children used for king changed over time. It began as the old fearful gesture, 2 fingers like fangs. Then, quietly, they replaced it with something else. A hand over the heart, then extended outward. Quiet kindness. The vampire king was still feared by many. Legends are stubborn, and people cling to them when they don't want to admit they were wrong. But I had seen the truth, a man who built a wall of fear so the vulnerable behind it would not be hunted, a king who learned a silent language so his brother would not live forever behind glass. And when people asked me what the Night Throne truly was, I told them, as simply as I could. He is a man who chose gentleness, again and again, even when no one would praise him for it. Because in LYR, behind the old prayers and the frightened whispers, a quieter understanding finally took root. That true kindness can live behind fear, and sometimes it survives there best, steady and unseen, spoken in silence. Ain in silence.